So, brethren, and all you at home too, of course, we don't forget you. And I would say this is a Bible study more than a sermon. And I've called it the Covering Cherubs. And it's intended to make you think and to study. Have you ever considered who is Satan? Probably most people haven't. This study could be a continuation of the red herring study we had a few weeks ago. And we heard then about the number of Christian denominations, all claiming to receive their teachings and beliefs from the Bible. And while that's probably true, many Christians have put different interpretations on certain points of Scripture. We all believe we have the truth, but it may differ one from another. Jesus told us in the Sermon on the Mount, "Judge not that you be not judged." And Paul tells us also in in Romans 14 verse 13, "Let us therefore not judge one another anymore, but judge this, rather, that you put no stumbling block or occasion to fall in your brother's way." Yet that is exactly what some do. For example, traditional Christianity judges, in many cases with hostility and aggression, most others who do not believe what they believe. Is that not a stumbling block? We can't take this to ourselves. We dare not judge anyone. But it's hard not to make observations. Yet the Bible does say, "He that commits sin is of the devil." That's in 1 John 3 verse 8. 1 John 3 verse 8 says, "He that commits sin is of the devil, for the devil sinneth from the beginning." The devil has sinned from the beginning. What beginning was that? Was it the beginning of the universe? The beginning of the world? Both Genesis and John speak about the beginning. We're not told what beginning this was. That's true. But Satan was sinning from then. Could it be Satan's beginning? For he is a created being after all. So what beginning was this? We read in Genesis 1, verse 1. "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." And then John says, in John 1, verse 1, "In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made." John tells us that all things were made by the Word, whom you know as Jesus Christ. All that exists was made by the Creator. Colossians 1:16. Colossians 1:16. "For by him were all things created, that are in heaven and in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions, or principalities, or powers. All things were created by him and for him." All things must include Satan and the angels and the sons of God, because they were all present in Job 38 verse 7 at the beginning, at the creation of the earth. John 8:44. John 8:44 tells us, "You are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father you will do." He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth. And because there is no truth in him, when he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own, for he is a liar, and the father of it. Here, Satan is also called a murderer from the beginning. And some groups don't even believe Satan exists. And this is what I told you. Many people are sincere in what they believe. Yet because of Satan's red herrings, many have been misled and distracted to believe that Satan doesn't exist and that God is only a myth. We used to teach, and probably most of Christianity believes, that Satan was one of the cherubs that covered God's throne. Yet he was a murderer, a liar, and sinned from the beginning. Isaiah 14 is often quoted to prove that Lucifer is Satan, and yet it doesn't say that at all. Isaiah 14:12 tells us, "How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations?" Many translations refer to Lucifer as the son of the morning, son of the dawn, morning star, star of the morning, shining star, day star, shining one. The contemporary English version of the Bible reads, "the bright morning star." But Jesus tells us that he is the bright and morning star. That's in Revelation 22:16. "I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star." Now, Venus is one of the brightest stars or planets in our parts of the heavens. You can see it just before the sun rises in the morning. That's why it's called the morning star. It's over in the west, although at this time of year it's getting harder to see from where we are. But it's named after the Roman goddess. And many ancient nations and cultures also worshipped her. This is what Lucifer is likened to in Isaiah 14 verse 12. But that's not the name of Satan. And brethren, right away, let me say that the first place where we actually read the name of a being called Satan and falling from heaven is in Luke 10 verse 18, where Jesus said, "I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven." And so some have concluded that this must be Satan that's being referred to here in Isaiah 14. But there's coming a time, and it's yet in the future, when Satan will be cast out of heaven. Christ said this right after the 70 disciples returned to him. If you remember, he sent them out. And they returned in verse 17 and 20 of Luke 10. They said, "Lord, even the devils are subject to us through your name." And I believe that this is when Satan fell. I don't think he actually fell at that time. I think he didn't realize that these disciples had the power they had. And he came down to see what was going on here. That's more or less in the sort of vernacular. But I don't think Satan fell way before Adam and Eve were created. There was an instance in Luke 9 verse 49. Luke 9:49. John answered and said, "Master, we saw this man casting out devils in your name, and we forbade him, because he doesn't follow us." Because this individual was not known to John's group, John wanted to stop him. And notice what Christ said. And how often could this be applied in Christian society today? But Christ said, "Forbid him not, for he that is not against us is for us." And in John 10:16, Christ also said, other sheep I have which are not of this fold. Now, we're not going to that today, but I'm just making a point here. There are quite a few areas where Christians do not agree. But the thing is, we should not be disagreeable. And there's one area of disagreement, a point to Scripture that has been interpreted or misinterpreted, that has caused a lot of, well, can I say, confusion. Who is Satan? And where did he come from? If you ask anyone about Satan, I think most people would automatically refer you to Isaiah 14:12. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer? And right away it says Lucifer has fallen from heaven. Then they might turn to Ezekiel 28, 12. No, it's 14. Ezekiel 28:14. You are the anointed cherub. And from these two verses, many believe Lucifer was an anointed cherub that covered God's throne in heaven, that rebelled and fell to earth. But is that right? You've heard me talking about ask the rabbi. Well, these rabbis often quote another rabbi. Rashi, his name is. Well, that's not his name. His name is Solomon. His name was Solomon ben Isaac. And he lived in France sometime in the 1100s. But he wrote a very comprehensive commentary on the Talmud and the Tanakh. He's very respected and highly regarded and influential in Judaism, right up to the present day. Regarding the word Lucifer, it is translated from the Hebrew word Hallel. The word Hallel in Hebrew means shine. But Rashi explains it really means a star. But also, he says, it's a reference to an angel. It's the ministering angel of Babylonia, not Lucifer. If you look at Isaiah 14 verse 4, you shall take up this proverb against the king of Babylon. Now, the point to remember here is Isaiah said that this is a proverb. It's a parable. It's not literal, it's a parable. So this ministering angel of Babylonia, this spirit being, is referring to the king of Babylon. And we will see that the context is talking about a human king of Babylon. But there's another being talked about here who is the ministering angel of Babylonia. And he's actually a cherub. He's not Lucifer. He's not Satan. So let's think about this. If you check the commentaries and dictionaries, many will say Lucifer was the name given to the planet Venus because of its brightness when it was rising in the morning. They also say Lucifer was once a shining archangel who became Satan. First, I would like us to look at Isaiah 13, verse 1. The oracle concerning Babylon. This is the city of Babylon, or the kingdom of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. You need to read all these chapters. But in verse 19 of Isaiah 13, and Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pomp of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. It shall never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there. No shepherds will make their flocks lie down there. And right there you read of the fate of the kingdom of Babylon. The ESV tells us in Isaiah 14 verse 4, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. The King James says, you shall take up this proverb this parable, against the king of Babylon. Young's literal translation tells us, you shall take up this simile. That's what it says. This simile concerning the king of Babylon. Now, a simile is a figure of speech. And that's the way Young translated there. Israel will taunt Babylon. You read about this taunting, this provocation, in verses 4 to 27. But this nation, Babylon, Isaiah 14:6 says, Babylon that struck the peoples in wrath with unceasing blows, that ruled the nations in anger with unrelenting persecution. It says will be defeated. And then verses 7 to 8 says, when Babylon is defeated, the whole earth will be at rest and at peace. Remember, this is a simile, a figure of speech. And verse 9, it says, Sheol, the grave, beneath is stirred up to meet you. The king of Babylon. It's stirred up to meet you when you come. So the grave is getting ready to meet this, to receive this king of Babylon. It rouses the shades to greet you, all who are leaders in the earth. It raises from their thrones all who are kings of the nations. Remember, this is a figure of speech. It's a parable, like Lazarus and the rich man. In the grave, all the kings of the nations that the king of Babylon has conquered. Verse 10 says, all of them will answer you and say to you, you too have become weak like us. You have become one of us. They're telling this king of Babylon that he's now like one of them. He's dead and in the grave. Verse 11, your pomp is brought down to Sheol. The sound of your harps, maggots are laid as a bed beneath you, and worms cover you. They're saying that to this king of Babylon, your ceremonial displays and arrogance are brought to the grave. Worms cover and devour you. And then we come to the scripture that is so misleading. Verse 12. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cut down to the ground which weakened the nations? This king, this ruler, who weakened all the nations, who set himself up to be like God, with all his pomp and glory and brilliance. We read about him in Daniel. He is the head of gold. The king of Babylon had a dream that only Daniel could interpret. It's in Daniel 2. Go back and read it. Daniel tells the king, verse 37, You, O king, are king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. You are the head of gold, and all your pomp and vanity. Read about Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4. See what happened to him. But carrying on here in verse 13 of Isaiah 14. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will be like the Most High. Verse 15, Yet you shall be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. And we just read that in verse 11. Now verse 16 says, They that see you shall narrowly look upon you and consider you, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms? Is this the man? This is not Satan. It's not a cherub. This is a man. Verse 17. A man that made the world as a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the house of his prisoners, and the kings of the nations, even all of them, lie in glory, everyone in his own house. All these other kings are lying in glory in their own graves. But you are cast out of the grave like an abominable branch, and as the raiment of those that are slain, thrust through with a sword that go down to the stones of the pit, as a carcass trodden under feet. And thou shalt not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed the land and slain the people, the seed of evildoers. This man, with all his pomp and power and brilliance and brightness and ego, was defeated and he fell. Astronomers tell us about what a star looks like when it dies, about its brightness and how glorious it looks. This man was likened to a star dying in all its brightness. Most people know the name Lucifer, and many believe this is Satan. Yet Isaiah 14 is the only place in the Bible where the name is used. In the Old Testament Hebrew, the name is not Lucifer, it's Hillel. And it means, according to Strong's, morning star. In Revelation 12 verse 9, we're given 4 names. The great dragon, the old serpent, the devil, and Satan. Revelation 22:16, Jesus tells us he is the morning star. So, is Lucifer also the morning star? Is that another one of Satan's names? Okay then. The other scripture taken as proof of Satan's identity is Ezekiel 28:14. You are the anointed cherub that covers. Was Satan or Lucifer actually a cherub that covered God's throne in heaven? If Satan is a cherub, then it cannot be an angel, let alone an archangel. No, we're not reading just about a man here. Neither are we reading about Satan. This is a cherub here. The rabbi knew the king of Babylon. Was an angel, a ministering angel of Babylonia. Have you ever heard of territorial spirits? Well, they're mentioned in Ephesians 6 verse 12 and in John 12:31. But it is thought these spirits have rule over certain areas of the earth and in the universe. Now, a lot of people don't accept that, of course. But the king of Babylon was one. And in Daniel 10 verse 20, we read about the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece. 2 more. Then in Ezekiel, we're told about the king of Tyre. Now, I know Hiram was a king of Tyre. And he provided help to Solomon when Solomon was building the temple in Jerusalem. But this one here, Ezekiel, this is not a man. This is another territorial spirit. Read about it. Ezekiel 28:12. Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyre, and say to him, thus says the Lord God, you seal up the sum full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Does that sound like a man? I have checked a few places, and I think this king of Tyre is referring to one of their gods, Moloch. There is some thought that Moloch was also a god of Tyre. If this king of Tyre was a territorial spirit, the god Moloch, then we are told, and you will read the significance of this right now in verse 13 of Ezekiel 28. You have been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, the sardius, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, carbuncle, gold. The workmanship of your tabrets and of your pipes was prepared in you in the day that you were created. You are the anointed cherub that covers, and I have set you so. You were upon the holy mountain of God. You have walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. You were perfect in your ways from the day that you were created till iniquity is found in you. This is not a man. This cherub is one of two that God set to cover his throne in heaven. What does a cherub look like? Ezekiel 1 verse 4. Ezekiel 1 verse 4. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud and a fire enfolding itself, and the brightness was about it. And out of the midst thereof, as the colour of amber, out of the midst of the fire, out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance. They had the appearance of a man. But every one had 4 faces. Every one had 4 wings. Their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot. And they sparkled like the colour of burnished brass. And they had the hands of a man under their wings, on their 4 sides. And they 4 had faces, and their wings were joined one to another. They turned not when they went. They went everyone straight forward. As for the likeness of their faces, they 4 had the face of a man, the face of a lion on the right side, and they 4 had the face of an ox on the left side. The face of an ox, I want you to remember that, because that's like a calf. It's like a bull. They 4 had the face of an eagle. Would you say they look quite formidable? Well, that's what God set to guard the gate of the Garden of Eden. And that's what he set to cover his throne. Does all that sound like someone who sinned from the beginning? Twice in the book of Job, we're told about the sons of God coming to meet the Lord. Job 2 verse 1. And again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan came among them to present himself before the Lord. Some people think that Satan is a son of God, because we are told in several places, when the sons of God came before God, that Satan came with them. Satan was able to come before God without any recriminations. Not even from any of the other holy angels that were there. And God even entered into conversation with him. Do you not think that's strange? Satan is not a son of God. He's not a cherub. He's not an angel or an archangel. And although some think Gabriel may be an archangel, and some denominations teach that there are several archangels, yet there is only one named in the Bible. And that's in Jude verse 1. It's in Jude verse 9. Michael. the archangel. And it says, Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses. He durst not bring any railing accusation against himself, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." Now Daniel called Michael the great prince. And when Michael and Satan had this dispute over the body of Moses, it says Michael wouldn't bring any railing accusation against himself. Would you not think Michael would have been in a position of authority and power to do that? Instead, Michael said, "The Lord rebuke you." Did Satan have the authority to demand the body of Moses? Well, he did demand to have Peter. In Luke 22:31, Jesus tells Peter, "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat." Satan has been a sinner, a liar, a murderer from his creation, from his beginning. He's an adversary. He's an accuser from the beginning. But he cannot go beyond what God has ordained for him. Is that the reason for his being? Nebuchadnezzar was called the servant of God when he conquered Judah. Could it be that God created Satan for the very purpose that he's been doing all this time? In verse 4 of Jude, it tells us, "There were certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation." So, what I'm saying and asking is, was Satan also ordained however long ago for this purpose? But anyway, that's food for thought. Let's get back to Isaiah and Ezekiel here. In Isaiah 1 verse 1, it tells us that Isaiah lived in the reigns of several kings of Judah, the southern kingdom. And at that time, the northern kingdom, Israel, had been overrun and deported or transported by the Assyrians. And we're told about an Assyrian invasion of Judah, beginning in chapter 8 of Isaiah. But in Isaiah chapter 36 and 37, the Assyrians came against Judah. And it says they captured a lot of cities. I think they actually captured about, it was 46 cities. But they could not capture Jerusalem. And that's a really interesting story in itself, and you should read all these accounts. But the point I want to bring out is that Isaiah makes it plain. This was, for well over 100 years, Assyria was a dominant power. And here was Isaiah prophesying about Babylon, which at the time was under the control of Assyria. Now eventually Assyria was overthrown by Babylon, and under Nebuchadnezzar, Judah itself was captured. As he said, many think of Satan, who is spoken of in Isaiah and Ezekiel. But Satan is called the serpent, and he's first mentioned in Genesis 3, verse 1. But Ezekiel identifies this being as a cherub. And Exodus 25 tells us there were two covering cherubs. So now, Brian, I want to take you back to Egypt here, before the Israelites came out. The Egyptians worshipped a goddess. Well, they worshipped a number of gods and goddesses, but this one here was represented by a cow. and her name was Hathor. And she had a son called Ippus. And he was represented by a bull, a calf. And apparently he was the most important of all the Egyptian animal gods. So what I'm asking is this: did the Israelites worship the bull, this calf, when they were slaves in Egypt? Did they worship the gods of Egypt? Had they forgotten the name of their own God? Is this why they asked Moses when he came to them, what's his name? What's our God's name? Had they forgotten? If so, perhaps that's why they persuaded Aaron to make a calf that looked like this God that they worshipped in Egypt. This was just weeks after leaving Egypt. But hundreds of years after this, after Israel and Judah separated, Jeroboam also had 2 golden calves made. And they told the people, "Behold your gods, O Israel, which brought you out of the land of Egypt." So you see, all through Israel's history, the tendency was there to idols. Another point to notice is in Exodus 32 verse 8. It says, "They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made them a molten calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, These be your gods, O Israel, which brought you out of the land of Egypt." So right there, and for hundreds of years after, the Israelites were told, "These are your gods, which brought you out of the land of Egypt." They sacrificed to this God of ancient Egypt. Stephen confirmed this. Stephen said in Acts 7:41, they made a calf in those days and sacrificed unto the idol and rejoiced in the work of their own hands. How they sacrificed is not made clear. But from the context and all our scriptures, they rose up to play. Exodus 32 verse 6 tells us, "And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play." Now this appears to be some form of sexual immorality. And remember, Moses was on the mountain at this time. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go, get you down, for your people that you brought out of Egypt have corrupted themselves." But Stephen called this calf by a different name. Stephen called it Moloch. In verse 43 of Acts 7, "You took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphan, figures which you made, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon." Now, did Stephen identify this calf to the god Moloch? For if this Moloch was if he was this Canaanite god, he demanded child sacrifice. And in Leviticus, as far back as Leviticus 18:21, so right from the start, the Israelites are specifically warned against child sacrifice. Perhaps when Moses came down and saw their idolatrous behavior, sexual behavior, human sacrifice, is that why in disgust and so much anger that he threw down the 2 stone tablets and smashed them. In Stephen's discourse with the leaders of the synagogues, he told them, "You made a calf in those days and offered sacrifice unto the idol, and rejoiced in the work of your own hands. You took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphan, figures which you made to worship, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon." Stephen mentioned 2 individuals here. Moloch, which you have seen was a bull, a calf, the golden calf, and the other god Remphan, who it says had a star. But that'll keep for another day. Notice too, Stephen said, "I will carry you away beyond Babylon." And didn't we read that that's exactly what happened? Stephen also said, verse 42 of Acts 7, "Then God turned and gave them up to worship the host of heaven. As it is written in the book of the prophets, O you house of Israel, have you offered to me slain beasts and sacrifices by the space of 40 years in the wilderness?" Who are the host of heaven? Would they include these territorial spirits? Brethren, all this was quoted from the book of Amos, for Amos asked the same question. Amos 5:21. Amos 5:21. "Have you offered unto me sacrifices and offerings in the wilderness 40 years, O house of Israel?" This wasn't a positive statement. They had not offered sacrifices to God for 40 years in the wilderness. But Exodus 32:17 tells us they sacrificed unto devils and not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that newly came up, whom your fathers knew not. Amos stated in verse 26 of Amos 5, "But you have borne the tabernacle of your Moloch and Cheon, your images, the star of your god, which you made to yourselves." Here Amos uses the names Moloch and Cheon, 2 cherubs. They carried the tabernacle of these 2 cherubs in the desert and sacrificed them for 40 years. Now I'm going to end here. I know this may sound like a bit of speculation, but the tabernacle that was carried by the Israelites was the tabernacle that was made to cover the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was adorned with 2 covering cherubs. Thank you, Brian.